Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 295 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is United with Purpose. Our quote of the day comes to us from Sun Tzu. He whose ranks are united in purpose will be victorious. Before we jump into today's episode, we would like to ask you during these challenging times to help us spread positivity and grab yourself a copy of our new book, The Positivity Tribe, at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or where else books are sold. I had an absolute blast recording today's episode. Our guest, Brant Manswar, shares an incredible no-quit story about his son and opens up about the importance of finding our black sheep. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Brant, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thanks, brother. I've been a huge fan for a long time. So this to me, a bucket list. Happy.
That is awesome. And I'm humbled that you even say that. So first question I have for you is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Well, I'm not going to cuss on this show, but the answer is bleep yes. Let's get it done.
And that bleep for listeners can be your word of choice.
Yes.
Awesome. So, as you know, the number one objective of our show is to motivate and inspire listeners to never give up. And I was curious if you yourself have either a no-quit story or perhaps a challenging time in your personal professional life where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to come back even to the purpose of this show that you talk about all the time, right? You talk about, it's about motivating and inspiring others and getting stronger and being better prepared. And then the other thing that I really love that you talk about is we rise by lifting others, right? So let's talk about that for a second, because that's really where my story is. My oldest son, Theo, in 2012 was diagnosed with a rare blood cancer that required a bone marrow transplant for him to survive. And it was a horrendous experience. We lived in the hospital for 263 straight days. And he got the transplant and developed something called graft versus host disease, which is where the bone marrow that was inserted into his body didn't recognize the environment of which it was placed. And so it began to attack. And so what the doctors do is they super suppress your immune system so the body won't fight back. And when they did that, he unfortunately contracted a deadly fungus. And so we had two things that were threatening his life: this graft versus host disease on one side, and then this fungus called mucormycosis on the other. And both of them had opposite treatments. So we got called into the parents' lounge one afternoon, and there was a row of doctors sitting there that said, listen, we're really sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. No matter which one we treat, the other one's going to kill him, and we don't think he's going to make it through the night. So you should probably call in who you need to call in and do what you need to do. Go say your goodbyes. And, you're never prepared to hear something like that. And so we stood up and shocked and crying and went back, walked down the hall to his room and grabbed his younger brother and, sat on the edge of his hospital bed and tried to find the words to say goodbye. And, what ended up happening was I had to call my whole family to say, this is, my family lives in New Hampshire for the most part, and I'm in Orlando, Florida at that time. And so I call my younger brother. I'm like, listen, bud, I'm sorry, but if you're going to say your goodbyes, you're going to have to do it over the phone. You're not going to have time to make it. And so he was distraught. He said his goodbyes. He was devastated. And that night, he felt helpless. And so he decided to sit on his couch, and he, wrote on 55 different poster boards as sort of a Hail Mary cry for a solution that we were told didn't exist, right? So this is what's happening. My nephew's dying. We're running out of time. He's battling cancer. He's got mucor. He's got this. He's got that. He's taking these drugs. If you know anybody or have any ideas, please help us. And he uploads it to YouTube. I sat on the edge of the bed all night long and, all that's running through my head at that time is this conversation of hearing him say, "I'm going to miss you, Daddy," and I am shook. And I'm sitting there, and my phone's ringing off the hook. He made it through the night. I'm trying to be present in the moment with him as long as I possibly can. And after a couple of hours, I finally reach for my phone, and I see all these numbers and names of people that I don't recognize. And what I didn't know is that video that my brother had made the night prior and uploaded it to YouTube, by the time I picked up my phone, had been seen over 500,000 times. And so all these people were people who saw this video, and some of those people were doctors. And one of them was from MD Anderson in Houston. And he said, "Hey, I got your number from a friend of a friend. And I think there's an alternate treatment that your doctor might not be aware of. Can I talk to him?" And so we made arrangements for that to happen. And then I get a call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America, who says, "You make a list of anybody that you want to talk to, and I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours. And so we did. We made a list of a doctor at Dana-Farber in Boston, and another sort of research doctor at Cornell University. And the four doctors put their heads together, and they came up with this crazy plan to try to save Theo's life. And it worked. And so, my son just turned 22 years old. Right before the pandemic here, he was in the classroom with other kids for the first time since the 8th grade. And, it's been a battle, but it's one that he's continued to win day after day. And I tell you that because as we're sort of looking at these things that you want to quit, right? I mean, you get faced with things. We were told this is an impossible situation. It's impossible. No matter what we do, the other thing is going to take his life. And one of the big lessons I learned, Chris, in that time is that sometimes the truth in the room is only the truth in the room. And you've got to expand beyond the room to see what's real and what's possible. And when we did that, we were able to unite people in purpose. We were able to unite them in value. And they believed that there was an answer that simply wasn't known at that time. And less than 24 hours later, we come up with a solution that changes his destiny. And that, to me, I can't think of a better thing of we rise by lifting others is exhibited by 500,000 people refusing to believe that there wasn't an answer.
Wow. I've done some research, as I do for my guest, and I think there's nothing that I read or saw that can explain it the way it's explained from a father about his son. And I have 3 young kids myself, so I first off, I can't even imagine going through the conversation with your wife and those doctors. But the thing for me, and again, it's we rise by lifting others up, we help others rise up, whatever the terminology you want to use is, I believe in the power of positivity. And I truly believe that people, when they're united, can do amazing things. And not to get on the political perspective, but, we're in a very difficult time right now in our country, from the pandemic through racial issues, through this political, I don't even want to say battle, I want to say political war. And I don't talk politics on the show, but it's fighting against the other person, and it's battling the other person. And what you just shared about that story of somebody telling you and your wife that your son has 24 hours to live, or he's not going to make it through the night, and then 500,000 plus views later, really just epitomizes when you put people together for a mission for somebody else. These people didn't know who you were, didn't know your brother, maybe, friend of a friend of a friend, but I'm flawed by that story, and that is amazing, and I appreciate you sharing that. To switch angles for a second, wanted to just ask if you wouldn't mind telling our listeners a little bit about who you are and what you do today.
Sure. So I spent the better part of 20 years living as a real life rock star, 2 different bands, 2 different record deals, touring all over the world. The first band was in the Christian market back early in the 2000s with a band called Fort Pastor, and toured there for 3 years and decided to take a break and not renew our record deal with that particular label, and released a solo record for a few years, and then formed another band called Big Kettle Drum with one of my former bandmates, and toured with Big Kettle Drum and the general market for the last 10 10, 15 years now. And just incredibly blessed to be able to be an artist and do music for a living. And when everything happened with our son, I had to find a way to sort of transition off the road. I was gone too much, and the road life of a band is not fun. It's not the glitz and glamour. Not everybody's U2 with private planes, and we're going to rent out the top floor of the Ritz. That is not the lifestyle that we had. And so for us, it was I had to figure something out, and so I started to transition from one stage to another. So I made the move to speaking, being a keynote speaker, and tried to take this tragedy that we were facing with our son and turn it into something positive. And so that's sort of been my message, is defining what matters most. And what you just talked about, even from the without getting political, I believe that the biggest challenge that we all have is that we have not defined what matters most to us. And when we don't do that, we wing it. And when we wing it, we argue, because all we're arguing is emotions. And so, I have a massive belief and cry for people to define what matters most in their life, because it changes what's possible, just like it did for our son.
Wanted to just touch on that for a second, because you have a book coming out, and we'll touch on that in a second. But if you wouldn't mind just briefly expanding on defining what matters most and kind of what made you come to that, I guess, idea and concept, because I think it's fascinating, and I don't mean to demean it, but I also think the simplicity of it is probably confusing to a lot of people, because it's almost too easy or too simple to be true.
It is, right? And so, this is what I figured out. I was 47 years old when somebody finally told me why black sheep weren't valued like the rest of the flock. And when I found out the reason why, it just I can't believe that I've lived 47 years without anybody telling me the real reason. Black sheep have been demonized for hundreds of years as being an outcast, right? It's the group in high school that listens to the crazy music, or they dress like the goth type characters, or whatever that might be. And we have this idea in our head of what a black sheep is. But the truth is that the reason that farmers don't value black sheep like the rest of the flock is because a black sheep's wool cannot be dyed. So every black sheep is in effect 100% authentically original. And when I learned that, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I'm like, that's my whole goal in life, is to be the 100% authentic original person I was created to be. Why are we demonizing this? And so what I realized as I did some research for the book was that not only is it the traditional sort of people who have been an outcast, or they moved away from families, or they've married the person that didn't, that nobody agreed with, or they whatever choices they made in their life that made them the outcast that is allowed them to be perceived like a black sheep. There are just as many people who have been so successful at what they've done that they've separated themselves from the pack, and in effect made themselves a black sheep based on their success. And so, what I really wanted to do with this book is get people to understand that we all have what I believe is a flock of 5 black sheep values. These are values that no matter how much someone wants to influence you or try to change you, they simply will not be manipulated. If we can get to those, then we can really start to live with deliberate intention, stop winging it, and change what's possible for our lives. And that's really what the entire book is based on.
Doing the research, and someone on your team I was fortunate enough to receive an advanced copy and read your book. And I lay out these interviews, and I never know, obviously, what a guest is going to say or how they're going to answer it. You kind of answered like 3 of my questions already with your answer, which is awesome. But something in the book that you say is deliberate intention. And I think that's something that is super powerful. And so I want you to touch on that for a second, but also the what versus why. As I shared with you before we went live on the interview, Simon Sinek, who's an amazing author, has been unbelievably successful with the idea and concept of why. And he's obviously not the first person, nor will he ever be the last person to discuss it. But so many people talk about, well, what is your why? Why do you do this? Why do you want to do that? Why do you want to get there? But you talked about the what. So it's a 2-part question, deliberate intention, and then how you define the what. Almost, I think, some ways more than or before the why.
So, Simon Sinek is brilliant. I think we can all agree on that. I think there's a little bit of confusion for people who read his book, and so his book of Start with Why. I agree 100% that when you have figured out your why, you should start with why. But what if you haven't figured out your why? And so the challenge becomes in people understanding that, I call our why our purpose. I think most people, if I asked you what purpose is, they would say it's our why. The challenge is most of us have been told our entire lives that purpose is something we find. And that's just not true. Purpose is something we choose. And if we want it to be in alignment with the things that matter most to us, our purpose has to be chosen from our black sheep values, these things that are our non-negotiables, the things that don't change. So for instance, I say we have to start with what? What are these black sheep values? Mine happen to be creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. I say we have a flock of 5. I have 6. I'm a rock star. We do everything to excess. I needed an extra.
I was just about to ask. I was like, wait a second. You said 5 and there were 6. So I'm glad you touched on that.
Yes, trust me, all of my mathlete friends have called me on it on a regular basis. And so I've said, look, I know I needed that a little extra for myself. And it's not uncommon for somebody to need an extra. But the truth is that out of those black sheep values, I chose my purpose. So creativity, hope, impact, empathy, family, authenticity. My purpose is to creatively impact others by authentically providing hope. It sounds familiar because it actually includes my black sheep values. They are in alignment with one another. And when our what and our why are in alignment, the how, which is our mission, however we choose to live out that purpose, we can adapt on a moment's notice. We can be resilient during times of struggle because those two things are in alignment. What I have found with people who have read Start With Why, which again is a fantastic book, but they haven't experienced the transformation that they thought they were going to. And I have found that most of the time it's because their what and their why are in misalignment. And if you don't define the what and you just choose a why randomly of what you think is real, the chances of those values showing up in your purpose are slim and none. And that's really where my book doesn't really challenge necessarily what Simon teaches. It just simply says, in order to start with why, you have to know what your why is. And so let's talk about how do you get to why, because that's not something that most people understand. And when I do my trainings, it's a 5-week process to get to your black sheep values and prove that they're your sheep and that you're not caring for somebody else's, which we find happening all the time. Or I find that people have given me who they want to be, but not who they are. And so when they go to find proof that these are the things that matter most, there is no proof to be found. And that's where we really start to struggle. And that's where people give up, is because who they think they are is not really who they truly are. And that's where it can get really challenging for people to believe that there's something better for them in their lives.
So I've taken about 1.5 pages of notes already. So I'm going to ask you to stop basically talking about all this now, because I feel like I'm going to redefine my what and why and who and where all at once. But based on what you just shared, and I appreciate you expanding on it, and definitely I'll talk about it later, but recommend our listeners to follow you, but also to look out for your new book when it comes out. If you had to define yourself, but you could only pick one word, what word would you pick?
Hope. Without question. Hope. It's everything to me. It's, I feel like stealing someone's hope is the worst possible thing you can do to another human being. And so for me, my number one, it's so when I help people craft their purpose statement, we bookend that statement based on the top 2 of their values. Which of the values matter the most? And so you notice mine ends on hope, by authentically providing hope. And that's because it's the number one thing that's important to me in my life.
Stealing someone's hope is the worst thing you could. I think that is unbelievably powerful. And I think that is what's going on with our country right now during this pandemic and during our race issues, and also with this presidential election, is we're taking the hope and the inspiration of what our country was based on. You know, people went through horrible things to come to America many, many, many years ago and continue to do in so many ways. And I think they, you know, you almost interview all of them. I'm sure the word hope would be somewhere in that first sentence or two. Hope for a better life, hope for more opportunity, fill in the blank. So I think that is super powerful. So you can't answer this question with any of your books, but I'm curious if you've read anything recently, or perhaps you're currently reading something that you'd like to recommend to our listeners.
Absolutely. So the last couple books I've read, Limitless by Lord Gassner-Otting is fantastic. It talks about finding consonance, which means aligning who you are with what you do, which is right up my alley. It's a fantastic book. Ron Teit's Think, Do, Say is a fantastic book as well. Jim Knight's Culture That Rocks is a fantastic book about organizational culture. Jim is responsible for 21 years as the head of learning and development for Hard Rock International. And so what he says is sort of the written rule of how to have a culture that rocks. And then finally, a fun one would be The Jackass Whisperer by Scott and Allison Stratton. It just talks about dealing with difficult people in your life and how you might want to learn how to deal with them. He tells everyone he's not the Jackass Whisperer, and so it's not his job, but it really helps identify the types of different difficult people and how to gives you potential ways to deal with them in a more constructive way.
I think I just came up with a list of about 10 people that I'd like to give that book to.
Amen to that.
And those will remain nameless.
Yes.
So if you could go back and give the 20-year-old version of yourself just one piece of advice, what would that be?
Stop winging it. You know, I'm a control freak. Like I could be the poster boy of control freaks. And what I realized, the hardest thing for me to realize the last few years has been that we don't control outcomes. We pretend that we control outcomes, but the fact is we can't. All that we can control is the deliberate intention that goes into making decisions. And so if I can focus on honoring those things that matter most, those black sheep values, and I try to get my hands on all the facts, not just the facts in the room that we talked about earlier, and I can honor what I feel in the moment, then I've made a good decision, regardless of an outcome. When we attach whether something is good or bad to an outcome is something behavioral scientists call outcome bias, right? The science doesn't support that. And unless your name is Gandalf or Glinda, you don't have that type of power. So it's like, you just have to understand that outcomes are out of our control. So don't put your happiness based on something that you can't control. And that's what I would tell my 20-year-old self is stop pretending that you control outcomes.
That's unbelievable the way you described that. I think that's so spot on. Now, if I had the opportunity to grant you dinner with anybody, dead or alive, who would you pick and why?
Prince, without you even finishing that sentence. Prince, because he was like 4'8" of swagger. Like you would think he was 8 feet tall. For me, being a musician, he is the epitome of what I think music should be. He didn't allow anyone to tell him what to do or what to write. He wrote about what he wanted to write. He said what he wanted to say, whether you liked it or not. He dressed how he wanted to dress. If he wanted to wear 6-inch heels, he wore 6-inch heels. You know, that to me, that level of confidence and swagger, if the world saw more people like that, we'd be in a different place. So without question, it would be Prince.
You know, almost 300 interviews now. Prince has actually only been selected 2 or 3 times. And if you had asked me who you were going to say, yeah. I don't think I was going to say it. So that is awesome. So we're going to switch gears now to what we call our hot seat questions. And the only request is you just spit out the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Last meal. You can pick anything. What do you pick?
A filet.
Favorite smell?
Lilacs.
Do you have a favorite sport?
Baseball.
All-time favorite team?
Red Sox.
Favorite movie?
Happy Gilmore.
Laugh at Happy Gilmore. All-time favorite author?
Probably Dan and Chip Heath.
What is your favorite app that you have on your phone?
Evernote. so I don't forget things.
That's a great app. What is your background picture on your phone?
Well, that's a good question. It is my black sheep values. It literally is all 5 of my black sheep values.
Awesome. And what is your all-time favorite book?
Chasing Francis by Ian Morgan Crone.
And I'm curious, as a musician, do you have an all-time favorite quote?
So it's, I host a podcast called Thoughts That Rock. And so we get lots of thoughts that rock and then we come with these quotes. There are so many, it's hard for me to pick one, but that's a really good question.
I stumped you for a little bit. I like this.
You did. I mean, honestly, if I had to pick one quote, So there's been, so Maya Angelou has a great quote of knowing basically when you know better, do better. And that to me has been a lifelong pursuit of mine is the more that I know, it gives me more information to make better choices. So that would probably be at the top of the list.
That is so powerful. What is one area or one weakness you wish you could work on?
I care too much. I can't let things go. It's why I no longer pastor a church, is because, 400 families going through crisis in some way, shape, or form just destroyed me because I couldn't let things go. I cared. I wanted to help. And if I couldn't find a solution, I didn't sleep that night.
So for our listeners that want to find out not only more about you, your podcast, but also your book, which is coming out, I believe, the end of this month, but you also wrote another book. So if you wouldn't mind touching on that, as well as where you're active on social media too.
Absolutely. So the first book I wrote was called Rock and Roll With It, Overcoming the Challenge of Change. And it looks at the 2 types of change we face in our lives: the intentional change that we want to make. I want to lose 20 pounds. And then the unintentional change that is sometimes forced upon us, like my son getting cancer. And how do we approach both of those things? Then the new book, Black Sheep, Unleash the Extraordinary, Awe-Inspiring, Undiscovered You, comes out September 29th. Available anywhere you buy books, whether it's Books A Million or Barnes & Noble or Amazon or your local independent bookseller, which I would highly recommend you support. For me, you can reach me on brantmenswar.com. Anywhere on social media, it's simply Brant Menswar, BrantMenswar. Any of the social media places, that's where you'll find me. And then the website for the book, which I would love for you to visit, is findyourblacksheep.com. And there's an assessment there that you can click on called Find Your Flock, and it will help you narrow down what's important to your flock of 5.
Awesome. And the last question we ask everybody is if you have some parting words you'd like to leave today with our listeners.
It literally is to define what matters most to you in your life. Stop winging it. Start to define what your non-negotiables are and watch what happens in your life.
I think that's amazing advice and an absolute spot-on way to end today's interview. So, Brant, I need to say thank you for your time. I appreciate your candor with your story and then what you shared with our listeners. And I know that we'll connect again soon, but I just have to say to our listeners, please follow Brant and get yourself a copy of the book. I've read it. It's fantastic. And thank you. And I know that we'll connect again soon.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for listening to episode number 295. Brant's story about his son really hit me, especially the power of positivity, and over 500,000 views in only one night. Brant's word is hope, which is something I think our country needs more today than ever. I challenge everyone to define what matters most to you. We are taught and often told what to do or what we should do, but make a decision and make that choice for you. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.